Castigators can be found in the ranks of almost every pilgrimage. They serve an essential role in being the first and the foremost to provide direct spiritual guidance and vigorous moral correction to the milling hordes of their fellow pilgrims, acting not unlike the non-commissioned officers of a regular military force. The path of righteousness is not always easy to follow, and transgressions made by pilgrims must be promptly punished to remind supplicants that they must always fear God's judgment more than the enemy or even death itself. As befits the castigator's role, they are often both imposing in stature, dour in dress and demeanour, and possessed of stentorian voices capable of penetrating even the most enraptured ears. All castigators bear a ceremonial scourge of some kind as their badge of office. The precise form of this instrument of correction can vary greatly depending on the castigator's patron saint and orthodoxy. For example, Methodians employ metal rods, the Dunstanians use hempen ropes, and the Marians' preference is for red-hot irons. The Lazarist Castigators of the Sacred Affliction commonly use scourges of braided leather, or of knotted hair shorn from their flock. The symbolism of the instrument is always singular, whatever form it takes. It is the whip of God, both a reminder and a physical manifestation of the righteous metaphysical punishment that is in store for all sinners in the eyes of the Lord. For those who have dedicated themselves to be martyred for the everlasting glory of God, it is a necessary and welcome tool, used to expose and exorcise the weakness of the body when confronted by the temptations of sin. Pride, envy, wrath, gluttony, lust, sloth, and greed can seep all too easily into even the most pious mortal soul. The watchful castigators always stand ready to discover any trace of sin and to vigorously drive it out. On the march, castigators keep discipline within the ranks of the pilgrimage and issue the war prophet's commands to the faithful. They act as the prophet's confidants and personal confessors, shriving them and granting absolution for any of their sins which do not fall under the auspices of the apostolic penitentiary. Castigators also take daily confessions from the faithful, typically after Vespers and by necessity en masse if the pilgrimage is a large one. Depending on the degree, transgressions made by the pilgrims can be absolved through vows, additional duties, privation, enforced fasting, or corporal punishment. In the latter case, the individual orthodoxy and patron saint of the pilgrimage also greatly influence the degree and nature of the punishment. Flogging, branding, and even mutilation are widely accepted as forms of physical absolution for most pilgrimages, but some disagree. Methodians abhor gratuitous and barbaric practices, and will prefer exile or incarceration over anything more serious than the most symbolic of physical correction. Naturally, Marians prefer to use severing and branding, while Dunstanians favor pressing. Lazarist Castigators assigned a weight of the millstone given to the leper pilgrims to carry as their symbolic weight of sin. So among that horde a wayward pilgrim will receive a yet weightier stone to bear. In the case of repeated or serious transgressions, a castigator may invoke a reduction to the ranks of the ecclesiastical prisoners, or even immediate martyrdom for that final judgment to be made by God. Heresy or blasphemy are universally met with instant excommunication and execution without last rites or sanctified burial. The sin of personally taking up the cause of the Almighty and then turning aside from the path is among the most reprehensible to a castigator, no matter what their creed, and they meet it accordingly. In a more pastoral role, castigators also act as the guardians of the pilgrim's shrine and its sacristy, and they are often the pilgrimage's acting quartermasters as well. In battle, many castigators lead their flock from the front, but in better equipped pilgrimages, castigators may stay in a supporting role to direct the pilgrim's righteous but at times unruly fury against a foe with more precisely directed volleys. In either role, castigators constantly remind the pilgrims of their ultimate duty to the kingdom of heaven, and absolve any temporary lapses on the spot with subtle verbal encouragement and corrective application of the whip of God. Inevitably, such a prominent presence makes castigators prime targets for heretic snipers and assassins, so they may wear armor or bear trench shields for protection. Some pilgrim dogmas eschew such protections entirely to demonstrate complete commitment to God's plan. But even these castigators may utilize martyrdom pills and holy icons to ensure they will not fall before the battle is won. Although they are confirmed members of the clergy as appointed by a pilgrimage, few castigators are students of the innumerable parish and metropolitan seminaries of Europa. Indeed, their role falls outside the doctrines of the unified church, which does not officially condone pilgrim processions. In some cases, castigators may barely stand within the broader orthodoxy of faith at all, as is demonstrated by the notoriously brutal castigators of the cavalcade of the 10th plague. Most castigators refer to their purpose as a calling that came to them later in life as a result of their natural disposition or personal experiences. They typically cite as receiving revelations from the Lord to set about His work at last. Combat veterans, non-commissioned officers, ship's boatswains, prison wardens, schoolmasters, deacons, postmasters, executioners, torturers, farmers, and police officers have all been noted as making effective castigators with little more than additional biblical studies. Those from other walks of life usually require a more rigorous period spent as an acolyte to a full-fledged castigator to learn the ropes, in many cases literally. There are whispered rumors that castigators are in fact ecclesiastical prisoners who survive the martyrdom or heretics forgiven by the grace of God. But those who speak them are careful not to do so anywhere where a castigator might hear. Confirmation of a castigator into the clergy can be made in the field via a writ of authority from the ranking cleric. The preferred method is to register the confirmation with Rome to ensure the castigator's name is added to the ledgers of the righteous that rest in the Vatican archives. Orthodox castigators will strive hard to ensure that their flock is sufficiently purified that they can one day make a personal pilgrimage to the Holy See and receive confirmation in person. Few succeed in this goal. Either their daily God-given burdens occupy all of their time, or they are martyred long before the opportunity arises. Other castigators have little care for notions of propriety, dictated from afar by the Supreme Pontiff in Rome, and are content to pursue their cause and their faith, unmarked and unknown save by the eyes of God. Because of this, the sight of a hard-bitten veteran castigator from the front lines on the streets of any city will draw guilty whispers and averted glances from some, and a huge upwelling of faith in others. Many a pilgrimage has begun with just a single castigator and a worthy prophet that they found in the hinterlands and persuaded to lead the faithful to battle. From these first small stones, a righteous avalanche grows. Okay, so unit lore drop today with the castigators getting some expanded lore, which is nice and is proving to be one of my favorite things in the run-up to the release of Carcass Front, as a lot of the units that never really got the deep dive lore that we did, let's say as something like the Court was revealed, we got a lot of lore about each unit that didn't necessarily exist for the Pilgrims and even the Heretics and New Antioch and stuff like that, because they had just been around already, and the lore writing and the promotion of the entire thing was really starting to kick up by the time we got core. So we just ended up getting quite a bit of lore for each of those units. So this is nice to see all the faithful units kind of and how they plug in together and how they do different things and the differences between them is a good bit of fun. Now, there's not a huge amount of the kind of history and the theological aspect of things to dive into here, but there's still a few words that might kind of catch people out, so let's talk about them. The Castigators are described as having stentorian voices, and that's from Homer's The Iliad. Stentor was a herald who was considered to have a voice as loud as 50 men, and it was his job to basically make sure everybody in the army heard everything, which was remarkably easy for him to do. It's almost like whoever wrote that just kind of needed a solution to how to get everyone to hear this shit. But yeah, stentorian, that's what that means basically. It just means you're loud, your voice will carry, but not only that also it's not just a volume thing either. It's you will be decipherable, you will be understandable at distance, which is a very different thing. Okay, so shriving, the act of hearing confession. The Castigator is described as they will shrive the war prophet, and that just means basically hearing their confession, imposing penance and granting sacramental absolution or forgiveness for their sins. And it's derived from an old English word, scriffin. It's an archaic religious term closely associated with Roman Catholic and Anglican traditions. But basically what this lets us know is that even in the ranks of the trench pilgrimage, even though things might militarily outrank the Castigator, it's not necessarily the war prophet who's like the ultimate authority here on matters spiritual, right? Matters martial, maybe. And even then, who knows? Like, who knows where the origins of that war prophet, but we'll probably get to that in another week. But like, these guys will essentially look after and safeguard the spiritual life of everyone top to bottom in the ranks of their pilgrimage. It is the Castigator who's coming off here as the ultimate authority in matters spiritual, maybe even beyond that of the trench cleric. I'm really interested to see and learn more about how those two interact with each other and in what way that power splits. Is like, from what I'm picking up basically, is the war prophet will be deemed to have way too much to do to worry about the spiritual lives of the people who actually follow them. So they'll be getting assailed by these visions and these things that they need to see and do and understand. And they could be like a babbling mess. They could be almost like a totem more than anything else. And the Castigator is the one who, like, it's literally kind of described at the end, the Castigator is the one who might find a war prophet that they feel worthy of following. Now, worthy of following doesn't mean that the war prophet is in any way impressive outside of the actual prophet part. So that's really interesting, and it's something I would love to see them explore a lot more. Okay, Vespers. Vespers is a traditional Christian service of evening prayer. It's usually held at sunset or as dusk begins to fall. The term comes from a Latin vesper, meaning evening or evening star. Now, these used to be, back when I was a kid, Vespers were like a big thing, and every major holiday day, every major religious day, every Saturday would have Vespers. It was mostly called like a night mass, but it wasn't actually quite a night mass. And because it was, I guess, modern, the timing of it never moved. Like, it never chased sunset to be held or anything. But yeah, like, it was a big thing. It's actually fallen away now. At least in the area where I live within Ireland, there's not that many evening services anymore, because a lot of these smaller communities might end up sharing priests across parishes, basically, so they can't do every mass in every place, which is interesting and maybe a little sad. But yeah, that's what that means, basically, Vespers. And then they talk about pressing as well when they're talking about the ways that absolution is often sought for these sins that are brought to the castigator. It mentions pressing. And what pressing was basically was people would be placed between planks with very heavy items placed on top of them. Now, sometimes it could be done to death. Sometimes it was just done as a form of torture. Sometimes there'd be like set weights derived as punishment that you would have to endure for time or whatever it is. Now, we can somewhat assume that these guys aren't that interested in killing everyone who sins. So pressing is probably wait for time. But they might also use it. Perhaps there's a kind of a derived penitence involved of like, you know, you're placed between the things and maybe an anchorite like puts their Catherine wheel down on it as a form of execution or something. I don't know. But something like that would certainly be interesting and definitely quite disturbing. So yeah, these are the castigators. They're the driving force of the shepherd and the wolf and the dog and the sheep all rolled up into one, basically, which is like a really interesting character to be. I really like the part about where it talks about the backgrounds that can make for good castigators, because everything on that list was ultimately a profession which, I mean, you gotta understand, like back in the day, certain jobs had real cultural cachet and would be listened to and obeyed and would simply be used to that. Like if they spoke within the workplace, they were listened to. Whatever they said was executed on. So it's not a massive surprise to see a lot of those popping up on the list of people who would make for very good castigators, like coppers especially. Like the idea of disobeying a cop these days is completely foreign to a lot of people. But like, I mean, you're talking back in the early 1900s. No, definitely not. Not unless you really enjoy like getting slapped around with a fucking nightstick in the middle of the street and everybody just going, well, that's that then, isn't it? So definitely a very fun and interesting list of people who would have, there'd be an inherent authority in their prior positions, and then they go off and they receive this calling. Now, because it's Trench Crusade, you can always kind of come at it the other way. Do they receive the calling because they're really suitable for the job and faith is that strong and God has reached out to them? Or do they receive the calling because they're the kind of person who would convince themselves they received the calling so they could go off and live this life of spiritual authority over other people? That's what I really love about Trench Crusade. There's always the other way to look at it. It's like, yes, a lot of these people will genuinely feel like they've been called by Christ to do these things. A lot of other people will feel there's a power structure here that I can insert myself into and dominate others from within. Now, they'll have to answer for themselves at the end of the day when their own judgment comes, but that's just one of the reasons why I like Trench Crusade so much. So yeah, that's it for this video. Last week was all pretty quiet. It was my birthday, so I just, wanted to chill, keep my head down. 45 years old now. Don't have the energy that I used to, so sometimes I need to just kind of take it easy and take it quiet. This week, there should be more content flowing. I'll be getting back on the shorts grind reasonably soon. See, shorts are kind of dictated by art more than any other thing. I always like to have new art to show, and I don't just want to do like flashes of like random art that don't always mean anything, but I'll figure something out. Like I'll get something rolling. We're also going to have some conquest shorts coming soon anyway, so that might fill up the shorts broadcast bandwidth. I honestly have no idea. But yeah, no, that's it for this week. Thank you all so much for watching as always. Remember to like the video only if you actually did like the video. Leave a comment if you've got anything fun or interesting to say. about Castigators or Trench Crusade or me or anybody else. And I'll talk to you all real soon, guys. Thank you.